Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the old world. It's been a few days now since we had the errata and the FAQ drop for Warhammer the Old World. Sadly, as is become a little bit typical, I was travelling for work at the time it emerged, so that did rather hinder my ability to put a video together covering the full documents. And by now, let's face it, it's going to be all over YouTube, it's all over Facebook, the Discords, the forums, etc. So instead, what I thought I'd do is have a look at some of the specific changes in relation to troops that I'm reasonably familiar with. And I think it does make quite a difference in the thinking. So, let's step forward. The humble state troops of the Empire of Man. Before we launch into the full ins and outs of it, I do know that obviously there's scenarios coming through the match playbook. I think they're going to be pretty commonly played. That is at least where I am right now. I've not looked at those in detail. Again, I know it's been all over the various YouTube videos looking at the details, and that it's going to change, well, the way that we build our armies, as we now have to think about different objectives. That being aside, let's look at the changes that we do know about officially through the errata and FAQ. So what did we get? Well, we've seen quite a few changes to the standard infantry rules. These affect regular and heavy infantry. What do we got? Well, we've got press of battle. Orderly ranks become a swirling melee. What does this mean? It means the fighting rank in a unit that hasn't made the charge, it gets an extra rank engaged. So your fighting rank is 2 deep, not a single deep. This does initially make us think of spears, and I will come back to spears later in the video, fighting in 3 ranks as opposed to 2. So a real buff to the number of attacks that are going in. Second, we've got massed infantry. If you've got a higher unit strength, you get +1 combat resolution. This is effectively the old outnumber rule. It used to be a thing for ages. I was surprised actually that it didn't make the cut of the original Warhammer rules. By that I mean Warhammer the Old World rules, because it used to be such a consistent thing. If you outnumbered your opponent, you got an extra pip for your combat resolution. Finally, we got parry. So if armed with a sword and shield, effectively a hand weapon and shield, let's face it, your armor value is increased by 1 to a maximum of 3+. So the heaviest of infantry that's already out there with its full plate armor and its shields, they're not going to see a bonus from this, but state troops are definitely not in that category. Other changes of note: generals of the Empire become leadership 10, captains leadership 9. That's not going to be directly relevant for what we talk about today, but it is worth noting because your general's leadership bubble at leadership 10 and having that captain unit at leadership 9, if you go down that route, is definitely a buff. It's definitely something worth thinking about for your support elements. Empire state troops themselves, they've been getting the horde rule. That applies to veteran state troops as well as state troops. That means they get an extra potential point from rank bonus, which I think is going to be quite important for them. And finally, just for completeness, I've commented on greatswords going up to strength 4. I was initially getting a little bit excited about the potential for the changes for greatswords, but they still suffer from the fact that they are very much competing with so much other good stuff. They're competing with your Demigryph Knights, your Inner Circle Knights, they're competing with your cannon, your Outriders, all this sort of thing. So I do think, whilst there might be some consideration for them going forward, and let's face it, there's loads of alternative sculpts out there that could be really, really pretty to use. Not convinced at this point, but I've not given thought to wider army composition at this point and really, really closely studied all of the scenarios. So maybe it's something I'll circle back to in the future. Anyway, enough of this waffle. Let's get into the full detail and think about the units themselves. Let's look at what we've got, the basics. You've got a veteran state trooper, They've got a weapon skill of 4 against a state trooper with a weapon skill of 3. All other stats are the same. What does this mean? Well, it means if you're fighting against a weapon skill 4 opponent, and there's quite a lot of those out there, they will be hitting you at 4+ if you're a veteran state trooper, but they'll be hitting you on a 3+ if you are a state trooper. Effectively, the promotion to veteran means 1/6 less hits coming in. So it does help with resilience, and in a game where we're not used to rolling absolute barrel loads of dice, maybe one extra hit not coming through can make a bit of a difference. Cost-wise, your veterans come in at 7 points a model, and state troops come in at 5 points a model. Historically, we've looked at this and gone, this is outrageously expensive for what you get. There's so many more infantry with much better points to stat ratios. But that aside, 2 points is a big difference here. What else do you get for your points here for veteran state troopers? Well, you get the veteran special rule. That's re-rolling a leadership test, which is expressly stated to not include break tests not being a leadership test. You get access to the drilled special rule at 1 point a model. That's a very powerful rule, but at 1 point a model on a big block of troops is going to start getting quite expensive. So we'll need a lot of thought around whether you really want to take it or not. And finally, veteran state troops get access to a magical banner. What this means is it also gives them the ability to double up on magical banners. And this is to an extent where the supporting elements come in that I mentioned a few moments ago. The veteran state troops by themselves can take the Griffin banner. This is a hugely, hugely powerful banner, I think, doubling combat resolution from rank bonuses. State troops would need to have the battle standard bearer in the unit in order to access this item if that's the way they wanted to go from a high static combat res position, whereas veteran state troops can take it naturally, and if you put the battle standard bearer in, they could also carry another banner which would either maybe help their lethality or double down into the combat resolution, for example the war banner, so pile on some extra advantages. So I think really your 2 points a model, you're paying for that extra pip of weapon skill, but you're also paying a price for the opportunity to really develop a more effective unit. Let's turn now to the different types of loadout you can give your state troopers. First of all, let's look at the classic, the one that doesn't cost you any extra points at all, which is sword and board, hand weapon and shield. For the purposes of this slide and all of the slides that you're going to see in front of you for the next bit of analysis, I'm assuming blocks of 25 models in a 5x5 formation equipped with full command. This feels like the minimum size block where you're going to get a decent level of static res, because let's face it, that's what this is all about really. But where you are maximizing the number of models that have to be removed to break into your static res whilst not breaking the bank on the number of things you're buying. I had originally thought about doing 4x4, which is the minimum size you can start getting into some decent combat res, I think, but they're actually quite easy to whittle down. So I think 25 in a 5x5 seems reasonable. Okay, so that aside, cost for our veterans, we're looking at 215 points. That's quite a mighty amount of points against the 165 of the state troopers. Looking at their combat output, assuming they were charged or are in an ongoing combat, you're looking at a maximum of 11 weapon skill 4, strength 3 attacks for the veterans, and those 11 weapon skill 3, strength 3 attacks for standard. Now, strength 3 attacks with no bonuses, they're not going to do an awful lot of damage to many things, I don't think. You're hitting all right on 4s, possibly 3s with the veterans. Yes, there is a bit of weapon skill 2 out there, but it's highly unlikely. Then at best you're going to be rolling 4s to wound in a normal circumstance. So those 11, you're looking at 5.5, 6 hits, couple of 3 wounds, any armors, that's going to negate some of those. You're not doing much damage, is the point of that. Then we look at resilience. 5+ save against shooting. This is where you've got your light armor and shield option, so it's keeping you alive a little bit, but you've got a 4+ save in melee. These guys want to be charged to get the boost to that defense. Static res, you've got 6 each. Where does this come from? It comes from close order, it comes from their ranks, it comes from the horde roll, giving them an extra rank, and it gives them a potential point from outnumber. And of course, they have their banner as part of the full command. I've also added some extra calcs here for what happens if you give the veteran state troopers the Griffin banner. Well, they go up to 265 points, but their combat resolution goes up by 50%. They now have potentially 9 points of static combat res before the battle even starts, or the fight even starts. And they're still needing to lose 12 models, I think it is, before their combat resolution starts to drop. So definitely those 50 points feel like quite a useful upgrade. So what happens if you want to start spending a few extra points on your models and give them a bit better equipment? Classically, I think from a defensive unit of Empire state troops, you're thinking spears in this regard for that extra fighting rank. What do we get? Well, we've got a 240 point unit now for the veterans, 190 points for regular state troopers. Everything else being the same. You've bought your spear, you've bought your shield. You're now putting out a maximum of 16 weapon skill 4 strength 3 attacks with your veterans, and 16 weapon skill 3 strength 3 attacks with your regulars. That's quite an upgrade when you're looking at comparing that number to 11. These attacks are still not particularly strong attacks at strength 3. Yes, you're going to get a bit of an initiative buff against certain situations when you're charged, for example, from the spear, but that's still probably not enough for you to be striking first, and you're still struggling with the lack of the ability to get through armor, etc., and high toughness targets. So I don't think that makes a huge number of differences. It might be an extra wound or two. All helps overall, because it will add to your static resolution. Armor-wise, we're looking at 5+, 5+, so 5+ against shooting and against melee. Light armor shield just kicking in. It's going to save a few of your guys. It's not going to save a lot of them, particularly if you're charged by knights or something that are going to just break through that armor pretty quickly. But all helps. Looking at our Griffin equipped veterans, 290 points, again for that static res of 9. That static res of 9 makes me feel a lot better about myself, I think, as an Empire State Trooper than the 6. And that's going to be consistent throughout these considerations. Finally, we have the halberd option, the classic loadout for an Empire State Trooper. And let's face it, if you're using a Null Army of Infamy, this is your option. You have to have a unit of halberd-wielding veteran or regular state troopers making up your forces. So what have we got here? We've got the same price as the Spearmen. 240 points for the veterans, 190 points for the regular state troops. Halberd and shield costing exactly the same as a spear and a shield. They're putting out, assuming the 5x5 formation, 11 attacks. But these are weapon skill 4, strength 4, AP 1, armor bane 1 for your veterans. Weapon skill 3, strength 4, AP 1, AB, armor bane 1 for the regulars. It's also worth noting that halberds do get extra bonuses now on the attack, so their armor penetration is increased. We're not worried about charging today, but it is worth a note that this really is a more aggressive loadout when it comes to attacks and indeed armor. Why? Well, you've got strength 4, that's going to crack a few extra bits, and you've got some anti-armor built into your weapon as well. Armour wise, we've got, because of the light armour shield, a 5-up armour save against shooting. Now you might want to actually thin the cost down a little bit here if you're willing to accept a 6-up armour across the board just from the light armour. If you don't think you're going to be running into a lot of small arms fire, or you think that the small arms fire is likely to be pointed at other things. So there are some cost savings to be made into this, which could potentially make your halberds a more effective unit to use aggressively, because you're bringing that cost down against the overall impact. Static combat res remains at 6 throughout, and again, we can get it up to 9 with that Griffin banner. There's a real differential here between spears and halberds, and looking at this, I have to say, for the 1 pip of armour that we're losing here, I kind of feel like I like the offensive output a bit more of the halberds now, because they're quite frankly more likely to get a few points through that helps our static res. Obviously, yes, if charging, you're not going to get the 11 attacks, you're going to get 6 attacks, because you're only going to be fighting with that very front rank, assuming you get the drop on your opponent, they don't go first for any other reason, etc. That being said, I wanted to just expand out into this idea of an aggressive halberd unit. Now, from my understanding, and I could be wrong, there's going to be some limits coming in for a lot of games where you can't exceed 500 points for a unit. What does this get you if you wanted to really go deep into your core with one really big unit of halberdiers, an aggressive unit? Well, let's say we're also willing to maximize what we've got by ignoring the shield, but we're going to give it the drilled special rule. 48 veterans ranked in a 10x5 formation. Obviously, it's not going to be a full 10x5 because you're too short for that, but you're still in 5 ranks. They're armed with a halberd, they've got their full command, rocking the Griffin banner. On the defensive, these lads are putting out 21 weapon skill 4, strength 4, AP -1, armor bane 1 attacks. They've got a static combat resolution of 9, and you need to remove a heck of a lot of models before you're starting to eat into that 9. Now, I kind of know what you're saying. If you've got a unit like this, why are you giving it the drilled rule, and why are we talking about it being aggressive when you've just given the defensive stats? The attacking, charging number of attacks would be nearly half that, with only 11 attacks going in. Well, my thought is you use the drilled rule, you're starting your unit in marching column. They can move 12 inches up the board. You can use then your supporting spellcaster, and this is how I've seen knights used a lot, I have to say, to move them a second time. Drilled kicks in, you move into a more normal formation, and then you push forward up to 8 inches forward. You're really getting someone's face, and if you do move your guys into a good position, that means their flanks aren't exposed to the enemy force, you've now got a massive block of halberds in your face, and your opponent's going to have to do something about that. Otherwise, you're going to be able to dictate the charge, you're going to be able to dictate whether there's a combat, or you're simply going to block up a large part of the enemy force whilst they get this unit out of the way. Yes, it's coming in at a mighty 497 points. That is a big investment, but I think it is potentially a differential, and if nothing else, it could be quite a lot of fun. I wouldn't expect the unit to survive very long, and it is quarter of your army. So is this something we're likely to see? A return very much to the Warhammer 8th edition style force, and I do remember when playing that quite regularly, 50-man plus units of halberds rolling forward, lots of magical buffs going off, and they became pretty unpleasant blenders. So maybe we'll see a push in this direction, if only for the jollies. Who knows at this particular point in time. That being said, let's get back to the point of this video, to do our roundup. Overall, we are thinking in terms of infantry being fairly defensive. We're thinking about them being able to secure objectives and to hold their nerve, hold the ground against the enemy. Actually, for me, this means there is one absolute standout character from our array of options, and that, entering from stage left, is the humble Empire Swordsman. Back in the day, they were the equivalent of the veterans with an extra pip of weapon skill to be weapon skill 4 compared to everyone else's weapon skill 3. But I think for cost investment, that extra point of melee defense just gives them that extra little bit of survivability. I think there's a real argument for halberds here as well. I think they, with the ability to, should anyone survive that first round of combat when they're charged, or enough of them survive to be able to crack back, they're going to pick up some extra wounds of damage, which isn't an option realistically for your swordsman. It's a bit of a sad day from my perspective for the king of the battlefield, the spear, being relegated here to it's not putting out many extra attacks. Yes, there's a few of them, but they're really weak attacks, and I don't think they're worth spending the extra points on, if I'm honest, to get maybe 1, maybe 2 extra wounds. If you're looking for extra wounds, it's the halberds. If you're looking to turtle up behind your shields and ride it out, it's going to be your swordsman. But overall, I think there's some real interest in the debate here that we can have around loadouts and actually start to see state troops on the field in a game of Warhammer that looks like a game of Warhammer, that looks like an army of the Empire really should, rather than just a massive cavalryman and heavy artillery. Do let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Have you got anything to add to this discussion? Is there a particular loadout you like? Do you think it's halberdiers without shields, for example, which I've not explored in great detail, and they're the really great way to go? If you've liked this video, and I hope you found it useful, do consider a like and a subscribe. Really, really appreciate that. It's the best way of helping a small channel. And of course, subscribing helps you keep tabs of when all the regular content is coming out. Finally, thank you once again from me. I am returned to the old world. Have a great day.